We have officially started with the pantry challenge. Our pantry is all stocked up and ready to go. So I am going to take you guys with me in our kitchen over the next couple of days and show you what we are working on.
My family loves to graze on food all day long, so it's important to have lots of snacks around for everybody to eat. And one staple that we always make is sourdough bread, and another that my kids love to have is cheesy breadsticks. Our usual recipe for cheesy breadsticks takes an instant yeast, and I've always wanted to experiment with making a sourdough version instead. So I totally was experimenting and winging this. I just used a similar ratio to my normal sourdough bread, but I did a higher hydration. I also used a lot more bread flour in this and a little bit less whole wheat. So timing wise, this was after we had finished homeschool, and it was about, I want to say it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I kind of got a late start on cooking this day. So I immediately after I finished putting my bread together, I went out to get some of the things that I needed for dinner. I decided to make a potato soup, and with our potato soup, we like to have kale chips with it. So this variety of kale is called White Russian, and I seeded it in soil blocks back on September 3rd. I transplanted them on October 6th. I looked back through my notes for you guys so I could tell you. And then I started to harvest those on November 1st. And the day that I am actually harvesting those is January 9th, just so you kind of know the timeline. So as long as it doesn't get too cold, I always have some fresh greens outside to go with some of our pantry meals. While I was outside, I also grabbed some broccoli for the soup to chop up and roast and then put in it. And then I have some potatoes that I'm getting out of storage to, obviously it's potato soup, to put in there. And for our potato soup, we use a lot of garlic. I think we put like 24 cloves of garlic in this soup. One of the things that I really love about doing a pantry challenge is that it forces me to be a better steward and to use my resources in a better way. We're throwing less things away, and we utilize more of what we have, less food waste, because I know that I have a limited supply. For example, we recently butchered our chickens, and I made this chicken stock out of it. And usually I will can the stock and I just toss the fat that's on the top. But this time I saved the fat because I knew I was doing the pantry challenge. And as I mentioned before, fats are one of the things that we run out of quite a bit. So I had that chicken fat, and instead of using an oil, I decided to go ahead and use it in the soup because no one would be able to know the difference. At this point, it had been over an hour, so now I am adding water and salt to the dough for my sourdough bread and then the breadsticks. I usually do the auto-lease for the dough, which means I don't add the salt until later, just because it makes a lot smoother of a texture and it's a lot easier to handle and stretch. And then the final result is a lot softer and lighter, and it just has a better crumb. Sometimes if I have a busy day or going somewhere, or I'm doing this like an overnight sort of dough and I just don't have a ton of time, sometimes I will add that salt right at the beginning just because it's better to have some bread rather than none at all, just because, you know, like in my head, I'm like, oh, it's going to take so long. But if I just add it all at once, then it actually gets made, even though the end result isn't quite as good. Okay, so back to the potato soup. This potato soup is all about the toppings and a lot less about the actual base of the soup. So for the toppings, we do the kale chips and we roasted the broccoli, and then we also cook some bacon with it and chop those up and put them on the top, and we put cheese on the top as well. So the actual potato soup base is literally just the garlic, a little bit of oil, the chicken stock, and then the potatoes, and we let them cook. And then we puree them in the food processor. And I forgot to mention, we do add some salt and pepper for some extra flavor in the soup. But the kale chips are salty and the bacon's already salty, so there is a lot of salt that comes with that as well. So that is it for the potato soup. After we finished dinner, I finished doing the bread and the breadsticks. I needed to roll out the dough for the breadsticks. I started with 2 of these half sheet baking pans, and I split the dough into 2 pieces, and then I started to roll them out. And about halfway through doing that, I realized that it was a little bit too much space. Like the dough was getting a little bit too thin. So I took I basically took the 2 halves and I put them back together on that one half sheet pan. And that was actually perfect size for them. And then I split the bread dough that I have, I split that into 2 loaves, and then I put them into the baskets for rising. And I put all of that stuff into our cold room for the night. The next morning, I pulled out all the bread stuff from the cold room, and I got the bread cooking first. I was also experimenting with a higher hydration for the bread as well, because normally I make more of a sandwich bread, which has the really tight holes, and I wanted the more open artisan type holes in this bread. Once I got that first loaf of bread in the oven, I got started on the breadsticks, and I mixed up some seasonings to go on top of them. So it was a mixture of salt, a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of oregano. I think it was probably a full teaspoon of basil, half a teaspoon of garlic scape powder, and then I had some garlic powder that I put in there, and I mixed that all together. And you see I'm taking the lid off the bread right now because I take that off about 30 minutes in, and then I add another 15 to 20 minutes on the bread. And then on the breadsticks, I added some butter and olive oil on the top of them. I use cultured butter and smooth that out, and then I added that seasoning mix that I made. And then finally I added some cheese, and this was cheddar cheese and parmesan. And this is the part that I messed up on, because usually when we make this, the breadsticks are done pretty quickly, like 15 minutes in a 400-degree oven, so 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And I cooked it for 15 minutes and it wasn't quite done. So I then cooked it for another 5 minutes. And by the time I took out the breadsticks, all of the cheese was just like fried, totally fried. It was hard and crusty, and that was a big fail part of it. So I thought, okay, next time I am leaving off the cheese until like the last 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'll cook it on there. I pulled some pizza sauce out of the pantry to serve with this. We canned the pizza sauce over this summer, so it was a good way to use that. So other than my little failure with the cheese, the actual bread portion of this recipe turned out really good. The kids really liked it, and I think we will make it again. But of course, the next time I'll add the cheese a little bit later, and hopefully we'll have a better result.
Well, the cheese is sourdough breadsticks.
Early in the afternoon, I got started on making our dinner for the night, which was chicken fajitas, and I knew it was going to take a couple of freeze-dried ingredients, one of them being the guacamole. And for that to rehydrate really well, you put cold water in it, which normally for other things you would put in some warm water so it rehydrates quickly, but for the guacamole you want to use cold water. So I put the powder in there with the cold water, and then I put in some lime juice, stirred it up, and put it in the fridge. Then I got out some sliced freeze-dried peppers from the pantry, and I rehydrated those with some warm water. These peppers are actually from 2 summers ago, and I had an abundance that year. So I had so many peppers, and it actually worked out really well because this year I didn't have as many. I never really measure how much water I'm putting in. I just kind of look at it. For the peppers, it doesn't matter because I will drain off any excess water. But for the guacamole, I just added it until it was like slightly runny, because as it sits and rehydrates, it will thicken up. I freeze-dried a lot of my onions from this summer, but I do still have some fresh ones left. So I grabbed the red onions for this. Normally I would use yellow for this, but red is what I had available. So I wanted to make the bigger chunks of onion, and when I freeze dried it, I just freeze dried it in the little diced pieces. So that's why I use the fresh ones here. If it's a winter day and we're all inside, I will make my own homemade tortillas, but I do buy some tortillas too for busier days. So I had a bunch of tortillas that I had purchased and frozen for a day such as this, and I grabbed those out. And then earlier this year, I took a bunch of the garlic that we grew and I chopped it up, and then I just froze it in oil because I've had such a problem storing it just as is. The day before, you saw in the potato soup, I did use some of our stored garlic for that. But the majority of what we store just goes bad really fast. So I have to kind of dig through it to find a good little head of garlic to use. And so I'm really glad that I preserved a whole bunch of that earlier this year so that I could have more for cooking this winter. We threw the garlic oil directly into this marinade that I was making, frozen, but it didn't thaw out like I wanted it to. So I ended up sticking it in the microwave and putting it back in. I forgot to show this, but I did put the chicken in the refrigerator with that marinade on it, and I let it sit for like an hour and a half, I think it was, before I started to cook it. Once the chicken was fully cooked, I put it in a separate bowl on the side so I could cook my onions and the other vegetables that I had, the peppers. I drained out the water from the peppers before I put them in this pan because I did have some excess water in there, but they did rehydrate pretty well. By the time I finished all of this, several hours had elapsed because what I didn't show here was in the middle of cooking that, I had to go and pick somebody, one of my children, up from somewhere, and then I came back. I also went outside and you saw I picked some cilantro, some fresh cilantro for this, and then some arugula from my caterpillar tunnel. So I put the cooked chicken and veggies on there. I just added some sprouted brown rice. And then this is the guacamole that I rehydrated and a little bit of sour cream. This is canned salsa we made this summer. And then finally some chopped arugula and cilantro. This meal had a lot of different textures and flavors, so it was a really good fit for using up some freeze-dried food because you could hardly tell. I had a bunch of different plans for today, but it looks like we're getting a big winter storm, so I need to prep out here in the garden. I'm going to be harvesting most of what is out here aside from maybe some greens, just because we are getting not only snow, but it's also going to be a low of -6 on Monday and a high of 9, so lots of days of just really cold weather. My tunnels, they do help to keep things warmer, but when it's that cold, we will still probably lose quite a bit because they're unheated. So I'm gonna harvest the majority right now. Rigsy baby! Rigsy! Hey!
No need to go inside for a snack. Yeah. Eat it.
I guess they do like cabbage.
Man, that was quick.
You gotta get it with your, there you go. We're working on harvesting the celery right now. Last night I left all the row covers off of these rows because I was trying to get them used to the colder temperatures. I did keep the tunnel all closed, but it still got down to like 20 degrees Fahrenheit
and it was a little bit too cold for the celery. I did get a tiny bit of frost damage, but it's nothing crazy. So they're still edible, but it's kind of sad that they're not as good as they once were, because we're doing a big harvest today, harvesting pretty much all of it because I know it's not going to make it through -6 degrees.
And then eat an evil life. Hey, I don't need that magic.
Here, come on over here. Just grab these.
Eat the veggies.
Last night, Cam chopped up the celery. We washed all of it, all of the vegetables basically, and then we put them in bags just so that they're easier to eat. It's quicker to just grab them like this and everybody can have it as a snack. And then we have 2 bags of the collards, and I have 3 bags of broccoli. As of right now, I'm not going to preserve any of this. If I start seeing that it's not being eaten fast enough, then I will go ahead and blanch and freeze some of these and stick them in the freezer or the freeze dryer.
So it's been a cold week, but tonight it's expected to get below 0. So it was time to harvest our carrots. We could have left them in the ground, but to do that, we would have had to put a bunch of hay on top of them, and they would have been just fine, but we didn't have that or necessarily the time to devote to that. So we pulled them all up, and we're gonna weigh them now to see what we have. Okay, 39.5 pounds.
When my kids were little, they were always with me and next to me because we were one income family. Cam went to work and I got to stay home with the kids. And one of the blessings and benefits of that is that they were just always next to me and learning as we went throughout our day. So one of the things that they learned early on is how to cook and how to bake. And now that they are older, they are very proficient at it. They can do it all by themselves. They don't need my help at all. And so when they want something to eat, they can just make it themselves. So on this day, Dax said, I want to make something sweet to eat. And I was like, sure, go ahead, make whatever you want. So he decided he was going to make pumpkin bars with pumpkin that we had frozen. And then he used some of the freeze-dried eggs that we had and just some other ingredients from the pantry. We use our freeze-dried eggs a lot, and we have found that the best ratio is 2 tablespoons worth of egg powder to 1/4 cup of water makes about 1 large egg. So on a big recipe like this, Dax needed 8 eggs, so he used an entire cup of egg powder and then 2 cups of water to get like a
A bit too much.